I'm probably going to revisit Jeremiah in the future. For this installment, I'm going to be discussing one of the most famous passages from Jeremiah, which is Jeremiah 29:11. This is a famous one-verse statement that's full of hope, it's full of promise of restoration, often used as the basis of a sermon or an encouraging part of a sermon. You hear people use this when they talk to people that are struggling or need encouragement. Context of this is the Israelites have been taken by Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon. Jeremiah is in Jerusalem, and he sends a letter that includes Jeremiah 29:11. So, just to give you some perspective, Jerusalem has been conquered and is in danger of being completely looted and ransacked. There's a remnant of Israelites left to tend to matters there in a way that only they can in Nebuchadnezzar's thinking. So Jeremiah sends this letter, and there's a lot of things in there. The issue that I'd like to discuss here is, again, going back to versions and translations. The King James Version is more or less recognized as being the most accurate translation. You'll notice it says King James Version. Here is that version. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Here is the New International Version, which is actually considered one of the more accurate translations or versions. You can see how it becomes an issue here. There's a completely different thing going on. Just one verse, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper and not harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Plans and thoughts are not the same thing. Those are not direct equivalent at all. If the King James Version is considered a word-for-word translation or word-for-word and thought for thought, and the New International Version is thought for thought, there's absolutely a big difference between those. I'm thinking about you. That's one thing. If I have plans for you, that's a totally different thing. I'm not trying to dilute the significance of this passage for the use of encouraging people, because the encouragement is that in order for God to have plans for a group of people, by default, that means each person or each individual is in that plan. So God knows that individual very specifically. And I'm going to probably go back into Jeremiah and discuss this, but the relationship that God has with us as individuals ends up being part of the plans that He has for us as a collective or as a group of people. So each individual plays a part in making sure that the group is acting in accordance to God's will. And God is motivating them to do that through their obedience, through their reverence, and their fear of the Lord, which gives them the wisdom to proceed under His unction. A lot of the times people will be listening to this, and I've heard this brought up before, where let's say a pastor is bringing this up in a sermon, or this is in a group Bible discussion or a meeting of some kind, and this verse is brought up, people will say, well, God is talking to the exiles in Babylon and letting them know that after 70 years of captivity that they will be released, and that if they do what God tells them to do, and He's telling them to settle down there because it will be 70 years, those plans in this verse apply to them and nobody else. That makes a lot of sense because that's what's actually happening. Jeremiah wrote inspiration of the Holy Spirit, or God Himself, and that letter is being sent to the Israelites in captivity. So there is a very specific handoff of that information to a specific group of people. The thing that would confuse somebody is that message may not apply to them. There's nothing wrong with thinking that way because that is true. But in general, what this message does is it reflects God's faithfulness and God's love. And that does apply to everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. If you consider the detail in having plans and thoughts for any person. You can absolutely accept that into your life right now. There's a warning in Jeremiah that if people don't do what God tells them to do while they're in captivity, then it's not going to work out. You can't rest in this verse, Jeremiah 29:11. I'm thinking that it's going to translate into something without your participation. That is not what this verse is about. It's kind of like Jesus' message. He says, if you don't do what I say, then you don't believe in me. Therefore, John 3:16 doesn't apply to you. This is the very same thing. Think about this verse and pray about it after you read it in context, and then put it forward into your life and say, you know what, I can be right here and now, knowing that God is this kind of a God where he will absolutely plug me in, even if I'm in an exile type situation where my life has been torn apart and I've been uprooted, or something catastrophic is going on, or I'm just struggling in my spirit with the demons that are constantly assaulting us. I hope you come away with a little bit of an enhanced perspective on Jeremiah 29:11, one that you can use to encourage yourself and other people.